here. We are in for quite the treat. I think so. I'll start us off with prayer and then introduce our speaker. God be with you. Let us pray. God of all creation, God whose beauty is found in all things, we give you thanks for the gift of music, for the way that it transports us, that it deepens our roots, the way that it connects us to one another. We give thanks for the mystery of God as we experience it in music. Be with us this morning. Offer us your joy and reassurance as we hear music, hear about the gifts of music, and through that hear about your love for us. In your holy name we pray. This morning we have the wonderful privilege to hear from Timothy O'Leary. Tim is the director of the Washington National Opera, and prior to coming to DC for this work, he was in St. Louis, has a wonderful career in the opera, and will share for us the way that his faith and his love of music come together. And he's even brought some musicians for us this morning, so we will get to enjoy some beautiful music during our time together as well. Please help me in offering a warm welcome to Tim.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. I'll speak for a little while, and then your reward is to hear some beautiful singing. And I have to tell you, we have one of our great sopranos from the Washington National Opera here, and I'm very grateful to her and her accompanist, because 10 a.m. is very early for a soprano. Than mine. So, okay, to begin, I have some thank yous and confessions. The first thank you is to the Reverends Joshua and Adeline for the honor of inviting me to talk here today, and especially to Adeline for her guidance. Given the topic, I also want to thank the singers and musicians of St. Columba's. I'm a new member of this church, and in the pews, I've been a grateful beneficiary of their beautiful music ministry. So thank you to Anne Timpane and Diane Heath, and everyone who makes the gorgeous sounds that so deepen worship here. And since I have the mic, I thought I would say that I think I speak for many when I say that I'd like to thank Ledley for his humbling example of leadership. So on to confessions. Confession 1, I'm a little daunted and emotional about being up here. Although I do lots of speaking in my work, I've given talks in churches, I have never, ever before been a member of a church until this past summer when I joined this one. I'm very grateful to be part of this community and humbled to be here. Also, 2 of my 3 children are here today, and they are the toughest crowd, so pray for me. All right, the other confession is this. If you look at the blurb about my talk, it begins with a question. Why does music have such power? So the confession up front is that the answer is, I don't know. And finally, I confess a bias. I love all music, and I think it's inexplicably powerful and divinely given, all music. But the music that I love especially, beyond comprehension, is the music of Mozart. So I'm going to start there in exploring the question. Now, it's one thing for an opera professional to say that Mozart is great. So why don't we start with a more objective, trusted source? How about Albert Einstein? Albert Einstein wrote this. Mozart is the greatest composer. Beethoven created music. But the music of Mozart is of such purity and beauty that one feels he merely found it, that it has always existed as part of the inner beauty of the universe waiting to be revealed. And here's this from another composer, Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky, who it turns out is with me on Team Mozart. Mozart is the highest, the culminating point that beauty has attained. No one has made me weep, has made me tremble with rapture, from the consciousness of my nearness to that something that we call the ideal, as Mozart. Consciousness of my nearness to that something we call the ideal. What is Tchaikovsky talking about? Whatever it is, it's hard to put in words, so let's consult some writers of words. How about Maya Angelou, who writes, "Everything in the universe has a rhythm. Everything dances." Or American playwright Arthur Miller, back to Mozart, "Mozart is happiness before it has gotten defined." What does that mean? I don't know. But I agree with it. Okay, how about Victor Hugo, who was never short for words, but put it very concisely when he wrote, "Music expresses that which cannot be said, and on which it is impossible to be silent." Music expresses that which cannot be said, and on which it is impossible to be silent. So as Adeline mentioned, I run a musical organization, so I was very happy to discover that quotation of Victor Hugo, because it helped me describe an experience I've had over and over. The feeling of crowds of people moved by the strange power of music, by what the music seems to say. And people are not just moved as individuals, but pulled together. In the presence of live music, the connection between musicians and the crowd is electric. A group of people becomes like one organism, breathing and responding together. This, I recently learned, is an emerging study in biology. How people in crowds hearing music experience heartbeat synchrony. Their hearts beat in sync. In other words, through beauty, music creates community. It can do this through powerful, shared experiences of emotional intensity. Now in opera, we combine that power with stories. So these experiences result in feelings of empathy for characters who represent partly ourselves and partly our fellow audience members and partly people whose shoes we have not walked in. By seeing, by hearing humanity in characters who are different from us, this art breaks down barriers. There are moments of this kind of shared experience that we've all had that defy description. There are lots of words we use to try to describe them. Catharsis, transcendence, unbearable tragedy, unbearable beauty. Another word is inspiring, which means literally to be filled with divine spirit. Author Elizabeth Gilbert gives a talk where she describes the moment when a performer seems no longer to be merely human, but lit from within and lit from below, and all lit up on fire with divinity. I've been part of many such moments, holy moments of community, thanks to music. In theaters, churches, synagogues, elementary school, gymnasiums, high school and community auditoriums, juvenile detention centers, or in stadiums, whether for a rock concert or annually at Nats Park, where the Washington National Opera presents its free opera in the outfield, where thousands gather with the ambient sounds of downtown DC accompanying the opera, and while children run around us in the outfield grass. But the holiest moments I've been part of are when music bridges divides. One of our responsibilities in the arts is to choose what stories get told. We stage the classic works, but also new works that sometimes touch the most meaningful, sensitive topics of our own times. In a recent season, Washington National Opera produced the opera Blue, which tells the story of a black police officer whose son is killed by a white police officer. The community rallies around the mother and father. At the funeral, the character of the father sings as he flashes back to all the times he'd given his son the talk about how to stay alive. Don't wear a hoodie, he sings. Don't put your hands in your pockets. Look the man in the eye. Don't look the man in the eye. Don't run. Blue is a work of beauty and poignancy. It won the North American Music Critics Prize for Best Opera. The performances were shattering, but the true holy moments came in the dialogue project organized to make sure that this production would strengthen civic fabric rather than tear it. Before the production, leaders came together from the Justice Roundtable, the Metropolitan Police Department, the National Black Police Association, and others in events hosted throughout the area at the Anacostia Community Museum, Busboys and Poets, to the Alfred Street Baptist Church. After every performance at the Kennedy Center, a skilled moderator led dialogue between the audience and singers. In each case, we prepared ourselves for divisiveness, but with the ingredient of music present, we found that people who would normally be on opposite sides of bitter political arguments were equally moved, identifying with the characters in this family. I've come to believe that when people sit in the same space and hear music, their hearts not only beat in sync, but something also takes place that cannot be measured or seen. Something inside them shines through and connects. They become present. They become capable of listening and speaking from the heart. The better angels of our nature, as Lincoln puts it, come to the surface. I'd seen this also years before when I ran the Opera Theater of St. Louis, and we produced a John Adams opera called The Death of Klinghoffer, about the 1985 hijacking of the Achille Lauro cruise line. In that opera, a single chorus portrays both the Israelis and the Palestinians. In that case, the St. Louis interfaith community, leaders from the Christian and Muslim and Jewish faith traditions, planned symposia, panel discussions, and activities with Jewish and Muslim high school kids. There was actually a pre-existing group called Jews and Muslims of teens. They called it JAM for short. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch wrote this: in other cities, John Adams' The Death of Klinghoffer has caused protests, pickets, and canceled performances. In St. Louis, it has led to an outbreak of interfaith understanding and civility. What is going on in these moments? Well, during the pandemic, when we could not gather in crowds, writer Adam Grant had a piece in the New York Times with the headline, "There's a specific kind of joy we have been missing." What was missing, he wrote, was what sociologist Emile Durkheim called collective effervescence, which Grant describes this way: the sense of energy and harmony people feel when they come together in a group around a shared purpose. Collective effervescence is the synchrony you feel when you slide into rhythm with strangers on a dance floor, with cousins at a religious service, or teammates on a soccer field, when joie de vivre spreads through the crowd. Before COVID, people felt it when they sang in choruses and ran in races and in quieter moments of connection. Thank God that we have these moments of togetherness again, especially at a time when things feel dark and uncertain. Throughout the ages, people have gone through the hardest of times, and collective effervescence has given joy, meaning, and in my view, especially through music, the experience of divine love. Okay, here's where I thank the Episcopal Church for strangely leading to my career in opera, and likewise, my love of music leading me to faith. When I was 17, a friend who was singing an Episcopalian church choir suggested that I join. I'm a tenor. Every choir is always short of tenors. I love singing, so I said sure. Looking back, I realized also that I was searching for a spiritual home. My dad was an Irish Catholic, my mom a Unitarian, and because they had never figured out how to bridge that, we were never part of a church. So I loved singing in that choir, and I also soon loved the feeling that I belonged there. Now, one reason this choir was good was that the church was not far from Yale University, and it included section leaders who were graduate students at the Yale School of Music. The tenor section leader was a guy named Matthew Polenzani, who is now one of the most famous opera singers in the world, just starred last weekend at a performance at the Kennedy Center with the National Symphony. As a high school junior, I sat next to Matthew, singing every Wednesday night and Sunday morning, feeling bad about my own voice. That year, the Yale Opera was doing The Magic Flute by Mozart. Matthew was singing the lead, and one night at the choir rehearsal, the choir director, a guy named Bruce Barber, told me that the Yale Opera needed tenors in their chorus, and would I like to sing The Magic Flute? I did not think I liked opera, which I thought was bloated and pretentious and ridiculous and elitist. Still, I thought this would be an interesting experience. By 2 rehearsals into The Magic Flute, all the stereotypes were exploded. The Magic Flute is hilarious and humane and self-mocking. And the people around me were not elitist jerks, but crazy talented, hugely dedicated people. The year after that, the Yale Opera was doing Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro, and I was already on the list. So they called me, and I said, oh yes, I'm in. Okay, now I was 18. I was just old enough to start to get that although The Marriage of Figaro is also a hilarious comedy, it's more than that. It's as deep as the ocean. I've heard Mozart described like Shakespeare as a walking comprehension of all humanity. Wherever he looked, he understood the people he saw. Their failings, their goodness, their silliness, their desire to love, their longing to understand one another, their sameness regardless of wealth or power, which in 1786 was a dangerously revolutionary idea that Mozart smuggled through in the form of this opera, although the play on which it was based had been banned. The Marriage of Figaro puts all this understanding of people into music. It's about how small and funny people are, but then it turns suddenly at the end. The whole evening is pairs of lovers double-crossing one another in insane plots and counterplots, until, in the final scene, one character suddenly forgives the person who, let's just say, deserves forgiveness the least. The onlookers are amazed. Suddenly, the most beautiful music emerges. A tutti contenti, the characters sing. Saremo così, which means all of us happy. It will be so. If forgiveness is possible, while we may not be happy now, saremo così, we will be. Now, if you know about Mozart, you know he was a person who needed forgiveness a lot. So the divinity of that idea is a theme that runs throughout his works. At 18, when I was self-defining and trying to figure out what I believed, I decided that the existence of Mozart's music in the finale of The Marriage of Figaro was proof enough that a loving God also existed. Years later, when I read that Albert Einstein had reached the same conclusion, that really sealed the deal. Okay, so we don't have time to do The Marriage of Figaro here, but we're going to hear something that Mozart, oh, it is coming to a Kennedy Center near you soon. So this morning we're going to do something that Mozart wrote 6 years earlier, when he was 24. He was working for the Archbishop of Salzburg, and he was getting restless. A few years later, he would move to Vienna to make his mark. This was the last piece he wrote for the Salzburg Cathedral, a setting of Psalm 117, which is the shortest verse in the Bible. The original Hebrew text is an invitation for the Gentile nations also to participate in prayer. The text includes this: "Praise God, all people. For God has bestowed on us," and the Latin word is misericordia, which means loving kindness or mercy or forgiveness. Mozart sets the word as if it's floating down from above. When each of my children was born, I played this piece of music for them, patting their tiny backs to the lilt, wanting them to know that the world was full of beauty, and wanting them to hear what Mozart does, which is to express the most serious ideas in the world with a kind of winking half smile. Okay, so please welcome two members of the Washington National Opera Caperet's Young Artist Program, pianist Pei-Xuan Lin, accompanying soprano Tiffany Cho. Since we're an opera company, I think we should do one blood and guts piece by Puccini. So here is an aria from the final act of Turandot, which the Washington National Opera performed last season. This is the moment when the character who is least powerful, a servant who has been arrested by the authoritarian Princess Turandot stands up to the cruel monarch and becomes the conscience of the community, predicting accurately that the power of love will transform even her. One nice thing about music is that we can hear in it how the experiences of humanity don't change over the centuries, how emotional states are recognized by us, whether the piece of music was written 100 or 400 years ago. In this case, we hear the sound of a person terrified to confront a dangerous, powerful figure who nevertheless finds the courage to say what needs to be said. Please welcome back Tiffany and Page One. And I want to say this aria is never sung before noon, so. Return to the question, why does music have such power? The answer is still, I don't know. But I can leave you with this from my favorite writer, who's an Irish poet and theologian, John O'Donoghue, who says, "We feel most alive in the presence of the beautiful, for it meets the needs of our soul." Okay, what questions do you have? Oh, so right, how about right here in the green? Yeah.
Thank you. Your explanation of why music moves one is the most satisfying and beautiful thing I've ever heard in my life. I'd like to know whether we could have copies of your stuff.
Sure, yeah.
How will we get them?
I'll send it to, I'm going to send you the one that I fixed the typos in, so I'll send you that.
I don't mind the typos. What you pulled together is just exquisite, so thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Have any of your has anybody in the Washington Opera ever sung at the Met?
Yes, absolutely. So Tiffany and Peixuan are members of what we call our Kate Fritz Young Artist Program, which is an apprentice program for professional singers who are on the verge of major careers. Just so you understand, it's like you are an opera singer. It's like you complete medical school and all of that by getting your music degree, but then you need a residency somewhere where you can have mentorship and perfect your craft. And so at the Washington National Opera, we bring in artists from all over the world for each production, but we have this resident group of Kate Fritz Young artists who understudy all the major roles, and they sing smaller roles on the stage. Tiffany just sang the role of Marcellina in the Beethoven opera Fidelio on the Kennedy Center Opera House stage. And yes, singers from that program go on to make their debuts at the Metropolitan Opera every single year. I don't know why that's especially qualifying, but that's the mission of the program, is to help launch those incredible artists. I always make the comparison to Olympic athletes, because opera singers, it's all a physical act, and it's just the human body, but no amplification. This microphone was here for the help of the recording that'll be on the web, no amplification. So the human body is able to achieve this potential by making all these vibrations and causing sympathetic vibration. It takes years to be able to do that with your body. And it's you have to study for years and years and years just to have a shot at having a shot at a career. And so it's a real privilege to work with people who are that talented and committed. Right here in the...
As an amateur musician myself, I really appreciated your wonderful speech about the power of music. But I have a very different question. Why did you choose St. Columba's? There are many Episcopal churches. Why us?
Because we're amazing.
I appreciate the question. So, when we moved here, my wife and I were we just didn't know what we were going to do as far as going to church. And when we lived in St. Louis, we had gone to the local Catholic church. We're both sort of culturally Catholic, and I say, when I decided eventually to join this church, one of the big questions I asked myself, really wrestled with it: can I be a Protestant? But when we came to this church for the first time on an Easter Sunday, I guess that was 2019, we were totally amazed at how welcoming this church community is. It was really an incredible experience. And then not long after that, we were, like everybody else, having to tune in, online during COVID. And then this was just the church that when we would get organized enough, we have 3 kids, when we get organized enough to come to church, we came here. And actually, Brooks Hundley, who's a priest here, is one of my sister's best friends from college. One time when we were coming here, we ran into Courtney outside, as we were coming in. And that just seemed like some sort of sign. And then, okay, I'll just briefly say, COVID for me, because my work is all gathering people in crowds of thousands of people live together, while people breathe a lot. So it was a real crisis to go through that. And it led to what I call my midlife crisis spiritual awakening. And that led me eventually retreat, a spiritual retreat with a guy named Eckhart Tolle. Have you heard of Eckhart Tolle? And on the plane ride home, I thought, okay, I think I'm going to join the church at St. Columba. That's fine. It was the incredible welcoming nature of this church and this congregation. Josh was the reason I'm here because I was giving a curtain speech at the Kennedy Center and I ran into Josh with permission.
Not by accident. I'm going to be on. Thank you so much, Tim. I was just recognizing that at kind of each point you talked about operas, like when you were 17 joining as a flute, and even when you introduced the performances that we just heard, it seemed like ethics, like a moral life, and like faith or mysticism and music and art were all kind of tied up in one. It just kind of seemed to come out at each point. I wonder, what you think of that. How what part of it plays? What part does that play for you in opera?
Thank you so much. Well, so like I said at the top, it's all music that I feel this way about. I could go on and on. I cut out all the other references because I wanted to keep this thing short. But I feel this way, Aretha Franklin's respect, will create the same emotion of awe in me. And so, awe is a word that I would use. Why do we do things? The art form of opera is totally irrational. It makes no sense. And I'll tell you, from a financial and business point of view, it absolutely makes no sense because it's all labor. It's all human beings. Nowadays, great masterpieces are written for the Broadway stage. Hamilton, these things are extraordinary accomplishments of humanity. But now, if like Lin-Manuel Miranda wants a certain sound, you just turn up the soundboard. Just needs one cello. Verdi, if you wanted more sound, needed more cellos, more people on the stage, and that's all labor cost. Anyway, the result of all of that is, I think, this. It's like this ancient technology for the creation of awe and joy. And yeah, I think actually opera is the combination of all art forms. It's music and theater and design and dance and all. That's why it's so impossible. And it's often, by the way, a lot of people don't like opera or think they don't like opera. I was one of those people. And a lot of that is the result of having never seen a live opera or only having seen a bad live opera. Because it's bad, it's terrible. But when all those elements come together, and by the way, I think the tradition of church worship and the traditions of theater have a lot of common heritage and a lot in common. So, I hope it's not heretical to say, but when I sit in the opera house and I experience the feeling of connection that people have, the vibration, it's just the human body vibrating and the instruments of wood and metal vibrating. And I feel what that does to it. My job is to sit in the audience and feel what it's doing, whether it's working or not. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I've gotten to understand over the years is that if you get it right, the art form does not fail. We do it, we have something called the Opera Look-In for elementary school students who come and fill the Kennedy Center Opera House busloads at a time. And every time you walk into the Opera House, we're going to do this. And we just did Verdi's Macbeth for elementary school. And you walk into the Opera House and you think, this is not going to work. They're going to hate this. And then as soon as it begins, the kids go absolutely nuts. And the art form does its job. I mentioned juvenile detention facilities, both here and in St. Louis. There were programs of the Opera Company to take the music into juvenile detention facilities. And there are almost no places I've ever been that are in need of the feeling of hope more than that kind of a place. And I remember once sitting in the back row at one of these performances in a juvenile detention facility, and the Opera Theater St. Louis had this little touring tiny production of The Pirates of Penzance. And I walked in and I thought, this is not going to work. This is not going to work. And by the finale of our little tiny version of The Pirates of Penzance, when the guy gets the girl and all the high notes are sung and all the ridiculous Gilbert and Sullivan music is happening, all these young people were just experiencing all the joy and fun of that music. And I was sitting next to the social worker for the place, and he was crying. And so was I, to see these young people experiencing this joy. So Joshua, I don't know that I even touched your question, but there is something about that that is not of this earth.
Yep.
So that's, I guess, my best. Yes?
I'm curious about that variety, that experience you had in St. Louis with the one audience reacting to the healing power of music versus the other. What was your assessment, and why did you think there was a difference?
So the question was, let me see if I've got your question. Are you talking about the difference between the St. Louis audience and the DC audience? Or
You know, when you were referring to an opera that you put on in
Yeah.
St. Louis,
It was called The Death of Plainwell.
there were, in St. Louis, the performance was well received and had a healing effect. And then you referred to someplace else, and the reception was much different.
Okay, that's true. So this was the question was, what was the difference between the performances in St. Louis, where this thing was very well received, and it's true, I mentioned that article that said in other cities it caused protests and pickets. I guess the difference was that this opera had premiered, it's about the 1985 hijacking of the jail, a very painful event. And normally when we tell stories on the opera stage, there's some chronological distance from what story we're telling. This was, in this case, a very recent event. So when it had been done very controversially in 1991 in various cities, and some of the performances ended up canceled and all that. So for me, the lesson of that, and the lesson that we applied in St. Louis, was when you're doing art that is that sensitive, when you're telling stories of the modern era and are about real people, then you have a huge responsibility to set it up in a way that clarifies your intentions. Why are we doing this? Why are we gazing into something that is so painful? And that opera, you should know, is most sensitive in the Jewish community. And so we decided, okay, if we're going to do this, we're going to make sure that we have support from the community before we go into doing the performances. So I had lunch with a woman named Batya Abrams-Goldstein, who was the executive director of the Jewish Community Relations Council. And I described this idea of this, and at that time, Islamophobia was rampant. This was around the 10th anniversary of September 11th, when there was that guy burning the Quran and all that. And so I said, what if we did this piece in St. Louis, and instead of letting it be this controversy, we worked really hard to set it up as something that was unifying across the faith traditions and therefore the community. And I'll just never forget when Batya at that lunch said, I think we should do that. And that she saved my life, because it could have been a disaster, And so that, I think, the other thing is, St. Louis, they call a big small town. It's not that big a city. So once we started doing this work, it really spread. People really understood what we were doing, and came on. People want the chance to connect across their differences, and one of the things we can offer in the arts is that chance.
Last one.
Welcome to St. Columbus. We're glad you're here. Right now, I think the importance of beauty is going to be so important. Finding spaces for beauty and art in our lives. How would you invite someone to start learning and appreciating the opera who hasn't done that before?
Mozart. No, literally, if I could write a prescription, and I appreciate the question so much. First thing to know is that a lot of, like I thought of elitist and ridiculous and all that. And by the way, opera, because it's so expensive to produce, does have well-deserved, stereotypical reputation for dealing in elitism and all that. We need donors, et cetera, et cetera. So they're one of my mentors who runs an organization called Opera America said, we have to stop pretending that all the stereotypes about opera aren't true. Some of them are true. But those are stereotypes, and like any stereotype, there's something else that's true if you look below it. So one of the most important pieces of information that I learned through those magic flute rehearsals is that the art form of opera is ridiculous, and we who produce it, we know that. We're not under any illusions, right? It's just you combine it all. It requires that idea of theatrical suspension of disbelief. You have to agree as the audience to say, okay, well, if there were a world where everything were sung and it'd be sung loudly with this big orchestra, what would it sound like? And what would it have that our world doesn't have? What would be worth spending time, listening to it for? And then I literally, if I could write a prescription, I would say you have to start with Mozart's The Magic Flute, and then move on to The Marriage of Figaro and The Barber of Seville. That people think in opera it's always tragedy. There's plenty of funny comic operas, and that's a really helpful way in for a lot of people. And then only when you're really ready do you listen to the heavy German stuff. You really.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.